Let me go straight to that. Why is the United States hegemonic? Remember that after the Second World War, the United States came out of the war as the only creditor economy, except Switzerland, but that doesn't count. Right? The only creditor economy, the only economy that was in a surplus. It had a trade surplus. It sold more stuff than it imported. Was the United States of America. Its factories were intact. They were not destroyed like across continental Europe or Japan. It wasn't bankrupt like this country was. And remember why you were bankrupt, because you owed all this money to the Americans because they didn't give you a single bullet during the Second World War that they didn't charge you for and demand payment afterwards, which meant that post-war Britain was bankrupt. It was completely in a debtor's prison owned by the United States.
We call that debtor's prison the special relationship?
It's a special relationship, yes, indeed. We call the same thing, that this is what's happening to Greece now. We are a debtor's prison, but we have a very special relationship with Brussels. Of the same ilk as you do with the United States, or back then in 1945. Okay? So they came out of it with their factories having their productivity and production capacities being massively enhanced by the Second World War. By 1945, the United States industry was capable of producing 8 times more stuff than it was in 1941, Pearl Harbor, just before Pearl Harbor. 8 times more stuff. Huh? And they created, remember the Bretton Woods system? Some of you who are older will remember that the British pound was fixed, with a fixed exchange rate to the dollar. Essentially, we had a dollar. All of us, the Greeks, the Germans, the French, the Italians, we had our own currencies, but it was a fixed exchange rate with the dollar. Essentially, we had a dollar. There were capital controls. We couldn't convert as much of our currency as we wanted to the dollar, but it was a fixed exchange rate. It was essentially a currency union. We were in the dollar zone between 1944 and 1971, when Richard Nixon destroyed the Bretton Woods system that the Americans had created. He destroyed it because the whole point about the Bretton Woods system was that it was a managed international dollar system predicated upon, based upon, the American trade surplus. By the late 60s, there was no... So here we have a hegemonic power in 1970-71 that is now into the red. Now, what happened to the British Empire when it went into the red? It collapsed. What happened to the Roman Empire? It collapsed. Every time a major power goes into the red, it starts fading. And the fall is very close. In the case of the United States, between 1971 and 2020, let's say, the beginning of the pandemic, its hegemony and power increased exponentially along with its trade deficit. It is the only power in the world that became stronger as a result of going deeper into a deficit. That has never happened before. How did they succeed in doing it? And this is your answer. By maintaining a strict monopoly on international payments. It was the only country in the history of the planet that had a currency which was in demand. People wanted the dollar, even if they didn't want to buy anything from the Americans. Because when you put petrol in your car, if you still have a petrol car, okay, even if it is a company owned by the Dutch, and it buys oil drilled in, let's say, Nigeria, from a Nigerian company, and there's no American involved at all. Every time, because it's denominated in dollars, every time you fill up your petrol tank, you are demanding dollars. You have to convert pounds, or yen, or euros into dollars. So the ownership of the international payment system is what allows the United States, much more so than the ubiquitous US Army, Navy, and Air Force, to maintain its hegemony. Kissinger knew that. I mentioned that in the book. In 1970, he asked his people around him. Kissinger back then was National Security Council. He was a National Security Advisor to Nixon before he became Foreign Secretary. And he said to them, how are we going to maintain our hegemony if we are in the red? And the answer he got was, we'll make other people, other capitalists from the rest of the world, pay for our deficits. This is what has been happening. But why is it that they can do that? Because they have the monopoly of the payment system internationally. What WeChat does, it threatens that monopoly. Remember the story with the German manufacturer? He's out of the dollar system. And with the war in Ukraine, something remarkable happened, because WeChat, on the one hand, and the Central Bank of China, having created a digital currency, its own publicly owned app that allows you to make free payments in renminbi, in the Chinese currency. So there are two things you can use to make international payments for free as a foreigner, as a Briton. You don't have to be Chinese. You have two. You have WeChat and you have the digital currency of the Central Bank of China. There are, as we speak, 210 million accounts of the digital currency. And business people can use it around the world to make free payments without bypassing the dollar system. That is a clear and present mortal danger for American hegemony. The reason why Donald Trump started the Cold War against China, this is my theory in the book. Why did he start attacking Huawei and then ZTE? And then you may say, of course, Donald Trump is a madman. He would attack anyone just for the sake of it. Well, Joe Biden comes in as the anti-Trump president of the United States. And what does he do with the Cold War that Trump had started? Does he claw back? Does he retreat from it? No, he turbocharges it. He comes out with a declaration in the fall of 2021, essentially sending the message to China, we are going to stop you from becoming an advanced economy by banning all sales of advanced microchips, which is essentially, it's like in 1800 banning steam engines, the export of steam engines to Germany. This is like saying, we are declaring economic warfare against you. And why does he do that? The argument that it's because of Taiwan is rubbish. Nothing has changed about Taiwan. The one China policy had always been accepted by the West since Nixon went to Beijing. So it's not that. It's not that China is building up its army or its navy. I will believe that only when I see Chinese destroyers and frigates outside Los Angeles. For the time being, all I see is American warships outside Shanghai. So none of that makes sense. What makes sense is that the Chinese payment systems, which brings together Chinese finance and Chinese cloud capital in a most effective way, just visit WeChat and you'll see what I mean, is a mortal danger for the monopoly of the dollar. The war in Ukraine did something quite interesting. This superhighway of all singing, all dancing, digital payments, Chinese payments, the WeChat and the digital currency of the Central Bank of China, that was already there. But it's like building a superhighway, you know, imagine 5 lanes on each side and a big, spanking new, beautiful highway with no cars on it. Because if you were a capitalist, even if you were a Chinese capitalist, you still wanted to use the dollar. Because if you produce aluminum in Shenzhen, you want to sell most of it to the Americans. So you want to sell it for dollars. And then you take the dollars and you take it to Wall Street and you buy American bonds and you buy real estate in Miami and so on. So the Chinese capitalists didn't even want to use this superhighway of payments. But the moment the United States, together with the European Union, confiscated $450 billion worth of Russian money, I'm not judging this. I'm not saying they should have done it or not have done it. I'm simply saying they did it. So imagine you are a Saudi Arabian sheikh, or the emir of some emirate, or some Indonesian bigwig, or Malaysian, and you think, oh my God, they confiscated 450 billion smackers because they didn't like their policies. Well, they may not like me tomorrow, because I'm not the best guy in the world. They know that, right? Well, maybe I should hedge my bets, not put all my money in the dollar system. I will put most of my money in the dollar system, but I will put some in the Chinese superhighway. The Americans see that. The smart people in Washington see this as a serious threat. Because if they lose the monopoly of the dollar system, of the payment system internationally, that's it. The United States is finished. They're deeply in the red. They have a huge budget deficit and a huge trade deficit, which they manage to turn into a strength only as long as the Chinese do not touch their monopoly. Chinese big tech does.